This week's episode was brought to you by Woo Woo and Ray of Starshine. Thank you, Woo Woo and Ray of Starshine. Technically, every episode is brought to you by Woo Woo and Ray of Starshine, but in this case, that's the name of the two listeners that supported us this week. In fact, it's with the generous support of listeners just like you that help our band of Barrel Bunny shock troopers stay stocked with enough cigarettes to deal with the stress of cataloging such a vast number of man-made horrors beyond reckoning. Without such, we would be reduced to a gibbering pile of myxomatosis-riddled lagomorphs with nothing left but a ringing headache, a Rubbermaid full of Tech 9s, and a penchant for cheese. If you'd like to help us avoid the cheese, or just hear the second half of this episode, then please visit www.patreon.com/thewholerabbit, where your monthly donation of just $5 will not only get you instantaneous access to the second half of this episode with Julian the Philosopher, nay, you'll get the second half of every single one of our extended or otherwise forbidden episodes. And if you order right now, I'll make sure to send you a 5x5 vinyl sticker of our Big Bunny Baphomet cover art and the digital keys to our Discord communication server, where we share carrot cake recipes, drink tea, and discuss our plans to take over the world. In this week's episode, we are joined once again by Julian Soloninka, better known as Julian the Philosopher, to discuss his provocative insights into cyberpunk metaphysics, which we discuss in its germinal stages under the inspired headspace of Alan Watts, Alduous Huxley, and Gregory Bateson. In the first half of the episode, we discuss the impact Alan Watts and Gregory Bateson had on cyberpunk and its corresponding philosophies, while investigating the role they played as secret agents, each with respective ties to three-letter agencies. In the extended side of the show, we continue our discussion with Julian and discuss prominent author, philosopher, and psychonaut Alduous Huxley, his connection to Jiddu Krishnamurti, the Death of Cleopatra, and what it all has to do with Philip K. Dick's theophany. Thank you, and enjoy the show. You know, I'm starting a group to play basketball and then discuss philosophy.
Oh?
Yeah, it's called Shoot First, Ask Questions Later.
I like that.
Descartes asks the horse if he's well-versed in philosophy. The horse says, "I don't think I am," and then disappears.
Nah.
A dolphin graduated from college with a philosophy major.
Oh?
Yeah, he thought, "What's my porpoise now?"
I knew it was gonna be something with porpoise.
It's hard to avoid the ones that don't rely on can't as a punchline, you know what I mean? There's so many of those.
One time I was walking back from my college with a friend, and there was a big statue of dolphins, and I turned to her and asked, "What do you think the porpoise of that is?"
Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Whole Rabbit, where we don't just try and terrify you into believing the entire world is run by a demiurgic computer program manipulating reality using hyperspace portals from a transcendentally evil object of metaphysical proportions that dominates a future timeline where we become biological drones for a hive mind we built to replace our own. Nay, we buck the system of control using our own ontological guerrilla warfare and threaten the very foundation of the Black Iron Prison using Cyberpunk Metaphysics as our guide, authored by the genius of Julian the Philosopher, our guest on the show this evening. I'm your host, Luke Madrid, also known as Hack Rabbit. I'm joined this week by our doggy in the digital domain, Mori-sama.
Bark, bark.
The cloven-hooved daughter of fortitude, Heka Astra.
Hello. I don't have cloven hooves.
Ugh, you're a unicorn. You have cloven hooves.
They're not cloven.
Yeah.
It makes it awkward because you do have cloven hooves. And if you don't, it looks weird.
No.
The diplomat of the Delta team, Tim, the Barrel Bunny hacker.
Hi, I do stuff. I like you. You're my friend.
Yay!
And our guest this week, Julian Soloninka, better known as Julian the Philosopher, and for good reason. Welcome back to the show, Julian.
Hey, how you doing? Thanks for having me back again. Appreciate that.
Welcome.
Well, we're very grateful to have you.
Yeah.
Before we get started, please tell us where we can find your many writings. In the last 8 months, I think you mentioned you'd written 22 articles, some of which are at the cutting edge of science. There's stuff about AI in there. Where do we find it?
Okay, so the articles right now have been posted on medium.com. So there's like a treasure trove of them there if you're looking for the majority of them, but I'm trying to populate Facebook. I have them on LinkedIn as well. So kind of like constructing a little ecosystem of cyberpunk metaphysics here.
And it sounds like they've been really gaining some traction, and you're writing from a place of inspiration. In the past, we've had you on the show to discuss Socrates, Neoplatonism. We got into Aleister Crowley and Nietzsche, and that was a bit of a roundtable discussion. Check out Feel the Beans if you'd like to hear that. But this time, I thought we'd mostly hand you the mic and let you explain to us the bread and butter of your philosophical insights, specifically concerning this idea of cyberpunk metaphysics. Because what a great name.
Well, appreciate that. Like, it's at the intersection of, I think, science fiction and philosophy, and I think that it puts us right at the cusp of development and AI and everything, so it's like the perfect place to start the conversation.
My mind just goes spinning when you say stuff like that, because it seems so obvious that technology and metaphysics are intertwined. And science fiction, in my opinion, is art attempting to tell us that. So that makes perfect sense to me. I'm curious to see where you take this, though. So you have quite a bit written already about cyberpunk metaphysics.
What is it?
What is it?
Well, I want to start with a little bit of the intellectual journey that took me here so I can kind of provide like a foundation for understanding. So I went on a trip to Japan in 2015, and I was preparing for this trip for a considerable amount of time beforehand because, you know, when you're going for more than a month, you want to look into everything, and I'd never been there before. So I guess I was looking at a whole bunch of things in relation to that, and I stumbled upon a really interesting character that some people in the philosophy, but also like the 70s hippie culture and also occult might notice this character. His name was Alan Watts.
Yes.
So
yeah.
Alan Watts just popped into my YouTube recommended algorithm. I guess because I had been searching for Japan so much, I guess it just put the pieces together for me. They're like, oh, this guy's, you know, Canadian, British, he's going to Japan, and it kind of fit together perfectly, right? Like, because Alan Watts himself was a British guy who spent some time in Japan, and then he ended up in California, and he became part of the hippie 60s, 70s movement and became a very influential character, almost like an influencer from the 1970s. And if you watch any of his work, he's so eloquent and he speaks so well about these topics like Zen philosophy, and he was one of the early popularizers, kind of like a Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Oh, cool.
But for Zen
Don't call him
philosophy,
that.
no, but you know what I mean? Like, a popular. No, I think it's a good thing because I think that pop psychology and pop philosophy has given it a bad name, but popularizing things is not bad.
No, it's not bad.
No, I love Alan Watts. I was down that trip too. Like, he showed up on my feed years ago, and I've not stopped my journey since.
Yeah, he's a very interesting character, and I guess that's where I started, because I started realizing, like, okay, what's he connected to, and what other characters are he connected to, and why is this showing up in my section, right?
You know what Alan Watts taught me? Like, one of the greatest things he taught me is you never trust any spiritual teacher that doesn't have dirty fingernails.
Yes, very much so. Or like Terrence McKenna said, where he said, don't trust gurus, trust plants. So I guess a guru with dirty fingers, I guess, would be closer to the plants than one who wasn't, I guess you could say.
Yeah, true.
Well, the reason he said that was because he was being questioned by somebody who was like, how are you supposed to be this like really wise spiritual person when you have all these issues? Like, you drink too much, you got like family issues. What's going on here? Are you some kind of hypocrite? And that was his response. He was like, never trust a spiritual teacher that doesn't have dirty fingernails. Because like, despite what they try to say, like in the front, if they're not like open about their ups and their issues, because everybody has it no matter what, then they're not real.
Well, he gets flack for, you know,
Alcoholism.
and I believe offing himself. So everyone likes to pretend that disqualifies his wisdom. I don't think so, though.
I don't agree.
It actually qualifies him. It's the opposite, because he's got
I would
dirty
say
fingernails.
he's a
He didn't
complicated
mean
history.
literally dirty. He didn't mean like literally literally his fingernails are fucking dirty. It was a metaphor.
No one's perfect.
You can
Yeah.
also take this in kind of a literal direction because it does overlap a little bit with the Christian idea that when you get to the gates that they look at your hands to see, you know, do you have calloused hands? Have you done the work?
Yeah, I didn't even think of that. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, it also made me think of the story of Diogenes and Plato, where Plato is at a party with a bunch of elites from Athens, and Diogenes is peeling potatoes in the courtyard. And Plato goes over to him and he notices him and he says, you know, if you were nicer to the elites, then you wouldn't have to peel potatoes. And Diogenes says to him, you know, if you didn't suck up to the elites so much and you peeled more potatoes, you wouldn't have to be nice to them.
You know what that made me think of that I really love is that one meme of, who is it, Socrates? And it's like just showing his face and it's like him watching Diogenes just himself in the street to make a point.
Yeah, I think Diogenes is like one of the most misunderstood characters of that era. And I think people really don't understand how genius he was, that he was one of the only people that could like bother Plato by actually disproving him with rational arguments, despite literally living outside and like having no like desire to conform to society at all. But he was still capable of like debating with like the smartest people in the city and like beating them on a regular basis. So
Which
I thought
pissed
that was
them
pretty
off.
funny. That
Yeah. And not only that,
yeah, but he's the
who was-
quintessential dirty fingernailed. He's the
Yeah.
quintessential dirty fingernailed sage, is he not?
He is.
Diogenes the dog who lived outside with the dogs.
But get this, dude. The greatest conqueror in history said that if he could not be himself, he would be Diogenes. I'm not kidding. And who is
Ooh,
that greatest
Alexander
conqueror?
the Great. Yeah,
Yeah.
Alexander the Great. So we're going back to Alan Watts. His significance is unmistakable in this case because what he tied me to in this situation was two other extremely important characters, Aldous Huxley and Gregory Bateson. These are two extremely important characters, and I'm going to explain why.
Sorry, I just love Aldous Huxley. What is that book that he made, like Doorways to the Mind or whatever? That was awesome when I
Doors
read
of
Brave
that.
New World.
Perception?
You mean the Doors of
Yeah,
Perception?
yeah.
Yeah, Doors of Perception, Brave New World, and my favorite one of his, which is the Perennial Philosophy, which I'm going to bring up in a little bit. So this is my trinity for cyberpunk metaphysics for a basic understanding would be Aldous Huxley, Alan Watts, and Gregory Bateson. And then with these three people making the foundation, you start realizing that they actually created the foundation upon which cyberpunk metaphysics was built. And essentially, like a lot of the cyberpunk metaphysics that you'll see, a lot of the aesthetic properties of it would be a synthesis of East and West. So you'll see a lot of Blade Runner aesthetics that will look like, you know, an Asian market, or you'll see a lot of those neon signs that are so familiar to people that are connoisseurs of vaporwave or some such aesthetic series as those. And you can kind of see how cyberpunk metaphysics is kind of a thing that was brought over by Alan Watts and was kind of introduced, and also by Gregory Bateson, because Gregory Bateson, unlike Alan Watts and Aldous Huxley, Gregory Bateson worked for the OSS, which is the Office of Strategic Services. For people who are knowers of history, that is the precursor to the CIA. And they were the ones operating during World War II. So Gregory Bateson was stationed in Thailand. He was a cyberneticist, but he also worked in psychological warfare. He was British, and he brought together the two other guys are also British. They're also British, Scottish, Aldous Huxley and Alan Watts. And Gregory Bateson, all three of them were brought together, and they were all actually in reality working for the OSS, and they were all secret agents essentially. And that cyberpunk is actually a collective experience that these guys had with regards to participating in World War II, psychological warfare, and the basics of cybernetics, which were all made before. In the foundations of World War II, you can actually find these things and their development.
So I'm personally familiar with Aldous Huxley and Alan Watts. I'm not familiar with this other Gregory Bateson. Is there something that he's famous for?
Yes. Well, I don't know if you're going to say famous because he's actually the linchpin that puts it all together. So his book is called Steps to the Ecology of Mind. And I wrote a thing called The Ecology of Cyberpunk Metaphysics. And basically the ecology of mind is referred referring to, basically he's talking about systems, living systems. And I got a little bit into that in the shadow AI thing when I was talking about living systems. For example, a living system would not just be us here together having this interaction, but also the computer systems that we're using, the internet network upon which it's taking place, you know, the capitalist system that underpins those, like the infrastructure that underpins us. So we all together form kind of a synergistic kind of system together.
I'm very
so
into
it becomes a living system. Yeah. And that's kind of a cyberpunk thing. And you can kind of see this stuff coming together. There's a lot of theory of mind going on here as well. So it's like the system extends farther than the human being. It extends into the non-human. And that's where you get into the whole cyberpunk metaphysics thing. So that's where you get the cyborg, right? The post-human anthropocene. For example, the post-human anthropocene is an even weirder idea where there's no humans at all. And the world is just functioning without us entirely. And that's kind of the direction that they're headed in. So it's like cybernetics is like the in-between stage where humans are like half organic and half.
So he's an author.
He's not an author. He was working for the Office of Strategic Services in World War II as a psychological warfare operative. And then he works in cybernetics, and he brings together Alan Watts and Aldous Huxley, and together they make things like MK Ultra. Okay. They're responsible for cybernetics and the Macy's conference.
You were saying he did write a book, correct?
Yeah, called The Steps to the Ecology of Mind.
You know what I find so fascinating about what you just told me? I had no idea about this guy either, or his connections to the OSS. But I do know that Alduous Huxley had a house right next to Jiddu Krishnamurti in Ojai, California. I've been there. Now, what I find interesting about your connection here to World War II is that, and your connection between the East and the West, is that this was a primary influence of theosophy on the occult scene around the turn of the century, which they attempted to bring forth a world teacher, an incarnation of the Maitreya, I think they called it. And in the time, it was in vogue for prominent occultists to battle over this title, this supposed world teacher that was coming to help, quote unquote, balance the force. I honestly believe this is what George Lucas had in mind with his prophecy, because it was such a prominent thing during this time. And the Theosophists chose Jiddu Krishnamurti off the beach in India. And if you really look into it, they chose him because he would just do whatever he was told, basically. And then they tried to pawn him off as this great world teacher. And then he was like, I don't want any part of this nonsense. You guys are crazy. And then he moved to the swamps of Ojai. And then he lived next to Aldous Huxley, right? And I had no idea that this was connected to the OSS because the second Jiddu Krishnamurti gave up this idea of being the world teacher, boom, Hitler rises to power, just like how it would in Star Wars.
So let me give you another connection to go with. You know who was a huge influence on Gregory Bateson, who was using psychology for these kind of purposes? I don't know if you guys know this, but Carl Jung was also working for the Office of Strategic Services as a secret agent. If you didn't know, Carl Jung was a spy for the Western. Okay, I wrote an article about this. You can look it up yourself. Carl Jung was a secret agent like 007, and he was working on behalf of Allied services. And he wrote a whole essay about this called Wotan. And he did psychological profiles on Hitler and the Nazis and provided secret information, including analyzing the occult connections that were dealing with the Nazis and providing all of this information. And you know who his connection was? Alan Dulles. Alan Dulles is the CIA
guy.
Guess what? Alan Dulles is the same connection that hired Gregory Bateson, Aldous Huxley, and Alan Watts. So I'm probably going to get in trouble for making these kind of connections because they're so obvious, but there's things that probably people aren't supposed to talk about at the end of the day because they're so important. And you can kind of see how the CIA is deeply involved in the foundations of cyberpunk metaphysics as a science fiction genre, the way down to the people who wrote it.
Bro, my head is spinning. I don't even know where to start with this because if you layer what you're saying with some of the ideas we've gotten into on the show here, well, it's going to take me a while to process that entire picture myself because you mentioned that Jung was an agent, maybe working with the OSS and provided...
No, 100% working for the OSS. He's a spy like James Bond.
Bro, Aleister Crowley was on that same team. He was also a spy, and he was writing articles in New York, but he also was, and he helped provide bogus horoscopes to like Nazi officials. They got one of them to like parachute into like England or Scotland or something. They did. And he was like whole like parachute, like drop suit was covered in weird occult symbols because they like offered him some crazy weird thing. And then they were like, no, we're just arresting you. So no, this did absolutely happen.
That's the like second in command dude of like Rudolf Hess.
Oh my God. Yes. Okay. So it's hard to keep all the details together, but
he's the deputy Führer. And yeah, he thought that he was destined to go stop the war with Britain because Britain is technically, well, the England is technically Germanic.
So this is also where we get this sign, the V for victory. They told us it was for peace, but this is what you're talking about because the Nazis liken themselves to the sun. So Crowley's like, well, we'll show them the occult symbol that represents Apophis, the thing that swallows the sun, and they'll be intimidated by it. So yeah, on the surface, it's V for victory or for peace, right? Oh, peace, the peace sign. But it's actually V for Apophis, and there's some occult literature that shows like, in this sign you shall conquer. I'll have to show it to you. But so you're
it's
dead
also
on
a
the
classic FU sign for the British longbowmen because the French would often like take captives of the English longbowmen and they'd cut their fingers off. And that was a way of saying, F you, I still got my fingers. So it is very English despite the occult connection, what you're talking about.
What was the phrase you used? Mechanical anthropism, or it was like replacing the workforce?
Oh, post-anthropocene.
Okay, post-anthropocene, post-human. Okay, so if you were to follow
Anthropocene, yeah. It means basically a speculative, philosophical, and ecological concept exploring what the Earth might look like after human dominance ends. It shifts the focus from human-centric survival to a world where humanity's planetary impact is managed, minimized, or entirely faded into non-existence, into the geological record. So they're sweeping humanity into the dustbin of history and replacing us with, I don't know, some type of AI intelligence or completely, non-material form of existence. But speaking of which, although Aleister Crowley and Carl Jung never actually met in real life, they did have an interesting sort of academic correspondence that you and the listeners might find interesting, because I know this group's interested in these kind of things. So keep in mind that both of these guys are secret agents.
Yeah, they are.
At the same time that they're having this correspondence. So basically, although Aleister Crowley and Carl Jung did not personally know each other, Crowley was an avid reader of Jung's early psychological works in 1919, and he famously used Jung's book, Psychology of the Unconscious, to help write his massive treatise on magic.
Dope.
So Jung actually disliked Crowley. Jung was aware of Crowley's work and reputation, but was generally dismissive of it. In fact, Jung once famously described Crowley's massive multi-volume confessions as being beastly upon words. Mm-hmm. Both figures shared esoteric history, Gnostic, and ancient symbolism through their lives and their work, and they often arrived at similar conclusions. While Jung mapped the mind through the collective unconscious and archetypes, Crowley achieved similar transformations through ritual, tarot, and magic.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing between them was Crowley thought that Jung was being too metaphysical, and he was extrapolating too much and moving too far away from basically like the ritual magic aspect of it.
Yeah.
And making it too far divorced into the psychological, right? So I guess you could say Crowley was less of a hermetic and Jung was much more of a hermetic in that sense, in the all is mind sense. And if you think about psychology, is not psychology hermetic in that sense, that it focuses on the mind and the processes of the mind?
So I'm not surprised to learn that C.G. Jung was a spy because, as you mentioned, we got, what now? Alan Watts, Huxley, and if you go all the way back to 007, who's the original 007? John Dee, the archmagus of the whole occult tradition, who founded, or at least helped found, MI5. He was the eyes of the Queen. So these two
Majesty's
traditions...
man of mystery.
Absolutely. So especially in Britain, these two schools have run together forever. And, the connection being cryptography, secret hidden information. But it leaves a lot of questions like, okay, can we call the CIA a secret society? This idea of replacing the workforce.
There's even secret societies inside the CIA, too. It's a series of Russian dolls. If you've ever heard of them, there's actually secret societies like the Finders, literally within the CIA. So it's like Russian dolls. It's like, it's almost tautological, basically. Like, how many different layers can you go through? Like, it's a secret society within a secret society. But I've talked about this before. Essentially, you can multi-stack your secret societies. Like, Pythagoras was initiated into the Eleusinian mysteries, the Babylonian mysteries, and the Egyptian mysteries. And then he started his own Pythagorean school. So he had 4 different initiations. Aleister Crowley was similarly initiated into the Freemasons, into the Hermetic Dawn, and that was before he made Thelema.
Yeah.
So if you think about it, these people, to become very powerful so this is a very interesting thing I wanted to bring up with you guys, that it seems like that back in the day, and you can see a lot of rich and powerful people do this too, they stack organizations.
Yeah.
So instead of having like one allegiance, they have multiple initiatory processes, and each initiation is different information is revealed to them, and then they ascend to the next level. And basically, I think Christianity has the opposite perspective, where they're like, there's only one kind of ascension that matters, and you can only have one kind of secret society affiliation. That's why Christianity forbids you to do all these other rites and whatever, because you're only supposed to do one rite. But you can see in philosophy, like Pythagoras or Aleister Crowley, you can see that stacking secret societies actually increases your power and increases your ability and your knowledge. So I would say that basically having secret society connections and intelligence society connections are basically like versions of a magical stack, like a tech stack of skills and initiations.
Well, if you get into occultism, that's one thing various authors will actually encourage you to do. You should join multiple lodges, you should join multiple schools, and learn as much as you can. You should stack them, which speaks to your point. So
yeah, and you can see it's kind of like a tech skill stack, right? Because when you're a programmer, you're kind of asked, how many programs are you competent with? How many operations are you proficient with? How many programs? Then you end up listing a whole bunch of different skill sets that you have, right? And these different secret societies, like being an intelligence agent, for example, like my article that I wrote, it was about the Zen master and the spy operator, because if you think about it, these guys, from Alan Dulles to Gregory Bateson, all the way through, and I think these guys were genuine spies. And if you think about it, that means that the hippie movement of the 1960s and 70s, which was so heavily influenced by Alan Watts, was also back in being influenced by the CIA at this very same time. And almost every time you see LSD talked about, it has to do with the CIA too. They're the ones who were giving it to the hippies in the first place.
That seems evident. Have you seen Mandy, the Nicolas Cage movie?
No, I haven't seen that one.
When he meets the big LSD distributor, he's very MK Ultra, like Nazi German coded without really saying it. And it's sort of something that's well understood amongst the high level acid people. Some people even say the Deadheads were an MK Ultra project or a CIA project. And I want to tie something in to what you've directed our attention towards here. The idea that perhaps science fiction itself is a psyop or a functional mimetic tool of this thought space. Basically, I can't prove it, but I believe Fritz Lang was working with some very occult ideas related to the new Aeon of Horus.
That's the guy that made Metropolis.
That's the guy who made the science fiction epic original Metropolis, which depicts the elite beginning their quest of changing humans into robots so they can ultimately be replaced. And it seems to tell the story of a new zodiacal age of Aquarius, where the masses and the elite have to work out their relationship with the dawning of high technology. So you end up very rapidly at cyberpunk. I didn't really even think about what cyberpunk meant, but it's the pairing of high technology with the quote low life, right? And so I don't think you have science fiction without that. And I've argued on the show that it's a product of the new Aeon. It's an expression of the new Aeon. And because Saturn rules Aquarius, historically speaking, like traditionally, I should say, some people have upgraded to Uranus now, but traditionally it was Saturn. If you look at like
I do love Uranus.
Thank you.
Oh, thanks.
If you look at I forget which organization, like the big science fiction award, it's a big Saturn atop what looks like a Tower of Babel. And so I think
The Saturn Awards?
the Saturn Awards, that might even be what it's called.
I think it's called Saturn Awards.
I don't even. So I'm hip to what you're saying, but I didn't know it went as deep as what you're saying. And I didn't know that there was an OSS connection. So I guess what am I getting at here is like, okay, you have Huxley, you have Alan Watts. Are you trying to tell me that the new Aeon, are you trying to tell me that science fiction fiction itself, or that cyberpunk as an idea is a psyop? Is an MK Ultra the thing? What are you saying,
Well,
sir?
I wanted to add, if you inject the culture or the zeitgeist with these stories that they come up with, it's actually priming humankind to accept that reality. And it makes it more likely that we will fall into that type of reality, right? Even though it can also be used for a denial of these operations. Like if there's, say like 1984 is a great example. People around you are like, oh, that's just a story. That's like a fictional book. That's not really how the world works right now, but it's getting closer and closer to becoming true. So I think it's a way to funnel us into a specific outcome by putting out all these stories into the zeitgeist, because like Carl Jung said, anything that's part of our culture is part of our individual psychology.
Can I just say something about that quickly? So, obviously I haven't talked about Plato for like half an hour. So obviously I have to talk about Plato because it's like an unspoken rule that I have. But Plato said that we are a product of the stories that we tell, and society is very much the same. We just as people are products of the stories that we tell about ourselves, societies are also a product of the stories that we tell about ourselves. So mythos operates as like a primitive storytelling device and conveyor system.
It's like a primer.
So basically how like the Homeric heroes, like the Odyssey and the Iliad, for example, which is interesting because they're bringing those back right now for some reason, a little bit of programming there. And Plato would say that those stories were actually bad and that he would probably laugh at us for thinking that the Homeric stories were good, because he was actually not a fan of them. But basically he would Plato would probably look at these. I kind of always use Plato as like a benchmark to look at these stories and say, what would he have said about these stories? And I think that science fiction stories are kind of like the stories we tell about ourselves from this time period. So it's kind of like the Matrix is like our Odyssey or our Iliad, like Blade Runner is like these kind of Homeric, imperfect, flawed heroes living in a dystopian time period. And you have to remember, Plato also invented the utopia and the dystopia, because the Republic is all about creating the utopia.
Or in Star Wars. That's why they tried to kill it.
And exactly. And that Star Wars, that Carrie Fisher is also quoted to say that they were on acid the whole time that they were recording too.
Oh, hell yeah.
As soon as I heard her say that, as soon as I heard that quote, I was like, oh, the CIA is all over that. Because remember, every time people talk about that stuff to you, just know that they're not far away.
Bro.
I've never done that, so don't think I'm being hypocritical. I'm not saying that everyone is like that, but I've never done it, and I'm just saying that I'm just letting everyone know, warn a brother.
You don't have to. But with the name like Luke, you sort of resent Star Wars. And then one day in college, somebody convinced me to take some E, and I decided to just watch A New Hope. And I was taking a lot of art history at the time, and I was like, this is some art history right here. I was like, I get it. I understand. I get why people love Star Wars, and I've been a huge fan ever since. So, I don't know, blame ecstasy, I guess. But it's...
Remember, Star Wars is a space opera, okay?
Yes.
So back to the Pythagorean theme, the music of the spheres, the Musica Universalis, right? Star Wars is literally a space opera.
Yes.
And it all fits together so well. And something else I wanted to point out too, that there's a quote that I thought ties this kind of all together, that all mathematicians are Platonists. And if that is the case, and it really puts us in a position where the simulation theory and all of the modern day computer scientists could be considered Platonists in a weird way. I don't know if that confuses the matter or makes it easier to understand, but it really brings numbers back into consideration, because without numbers and without number theory, like cyberpunk metaphysics would be impossible. So I kind of think that the secret societies of the CIA are like injecting like Pythagorean beliefs back into society. Like numbers are everything. Ones and zeros are to be worshipped. These ideas are important. You know what I mean? And they're doing it through stories. They're doing it through a series of stories that we tell about ourselves.
Oh man, there's this popular Capcom game that just came out called Pragmata. It is from top to bottom stuffed with occult symbolism, and it's right on the money about this ones and zeros thing you're talking about.
Yeah, it is. I got it too.
I could just talk about it a lot, so I'm going to try not to. I want to go back to...
We should do an episode on that.
We actually could, because it's actually Sacred Grove. We have a lot of Diana coded shit in the whole rabbit. So going back to where were we? So using Pragmata pragmata as a modern example, it seems evident that somebody with occult knowledge created a story that we would want to in some way live out ourselves. And it's a whole new IP. So it's a whole new mythological world, and it's very friendly to adopting children, making children, fathering children, etc. It's a psyop, and I knew that going into it. And it's an interesting idea that there are people with intelligence connections that help create the fictions that we digest, which we then internalize and then 3D print into reality through our own subconscious mechanism. What are they? Are they all doing weird thelemic rituals back there? Are they all worshiping Saturn? What the is going on? I just want answers, damn it. Rabbit hole just goes deeper. Please, tell me more.
So I've been obviously, spend an inordinately crazy amount of time on this subject looking for these answers, and I've already found some of them that maybe you guys can dissect for me and tell me if they sound reasonable. Okay, so we talked about that Plato said that the people that tell stories rule society, okay? And what he was talking about was the Homeric heroes. So he was talking about Homer. He was talking about the Iliad and the Odyssey. Those were the stories that ruled the society that he lived in, because those were like their Bible for their days, okay? And basically, so that was the important situation. And think about this, Plato was also an initiate into the secret societies, and his books, the Republic and the Apology and the other ones, and the Critias and the Timaeus, all of these ones together in the Symposium, all of these ones, if you think about it, are the bedrock of all Western philosophy, right? And he was an initiate to secret societies. So that means that all Western philosophy is a product of secret society initiation. And then we go further and we say, okay, well, if the secret society people were the people writing the stories that we tell about ourselves back in the day, guess what? The secret society people are writing the stories that we tell about ourselves today as well as they were back then. So it's really the secret societies in Western civilization that write the stories that we tell about ourselves, and they always have.
So you're telling me the bard is the most powerful class in the game, and the bard is also a spy. No? That made Tim mad.
No, it's all about the paladin. Yeah, it's about the retribution paladin. That's the most powerful class in the game.
It says the paladin. No offense, Tim.
Well,
You're the paladin on the show.
I know.
It's like, it's an interesting question, right? It's like, who's more powerful, right? Who's more powerful? And this is where it comes to the questions we were talking about heroes, where you wanted to bring in the heroes question. So the question is, who is the more powerful? Is it Achilles or is it Socrates? Is it the immortal hero of courage and bravery, or is it the hero of the logos, the hero of the mind and the soul? Who is the superior force?
Well, he did have a shitty ankle, so f*** him.
I'm biased. I'm always going to say the hero of the mind or the soul. I mean, it's cool to have the laser gun in the fast car and the hot babe sitting next to me, but it is really the hero of the mind who wins. You know what I mean? I want to believe that.
So if you think about it, like the philosopher like Socrates, because before him and before Plato, the heroes were like the Odyssey and the Iliad. They were Odysseus and Achilles and Ajax, and these people were brutal characters. They were not rational enough per se to morally govern themselves, let alone govern a just and fair society.
They were cunning,
so
though.
Therefore that we needed a rational force, though, because rationality is part of goodness and morality, and therefore that we needed a hero of the mind, and the hero of the mind would be Socrates because he's dealing with virtue. So this is the interesting part that I'm going to bring up Nietzsche again, because Nietzsche said that the appearance of the Greek philosophers actually signaled that Greek society had already lost its values, and that the appearance of philosophers actually signals the end of that society rather than the beginning of the golden age. It's the end of it, because when you start asking questions like what is morality and who are we and what are we, then you've probably already lost touch with those things and those origins already. You're so divorced from the original purposes of your society. So basically, he would say that the kind of Socratic wisdom that Socrates was preaching was like a carrion call to a bunch of vultures that were descending upon Greek civilization. And if you look at the situation after what happened, they were conquered by the Spartans, they were conquered by the Romans, and then absorbed into the cultural mosaic that is the Roman Empire going forward. But he was essentially right in that sense, that Socrates was the hero of rationality, which is a huge contrast to the primitive kind of barbaric heroes of the past who were not rational. So this kind of sense of the man of the future, the man of the West, is a man of rationality. And now you start hearing the drums of the Enlightenment start to be heard in the distance, drums in the deep, right? And it basically reminds us that our past is the heroic character like the Superman or the Achilles, but the Superman that Nietzsche was talking about, the Übermensch, is also the hero of the soul and the mind as well. He's not just barbaric hero of Homeric values, but that's why Nietzsche didn't like Plato and Socrates, because he said that they actually signaled the end of the Greek golden era. So that's why he wanted to go return to the Dionysian, to the old heroes, rather than Socrates, who appealed to the Apollonian. So the mind versus the Homeric hero. So yeah, that's the difference there.
This is fascinating. So what I find interesting about this is if you look at, from an occult perspective, the tarot cards associated with the aeon we're living in, which is supposedly Aquarius. On the opposite side of the sky, you have Leo. And the tarot cards, you have the Star and you have Lust, the card formerly known as Strength. And if you march it all the way back to the Marseille deck, it's originally the Force. So that's the dichotomy that you're talking about, at least to me, because the Force, or Strength, or Lust, portrays Babylon astride the beast. And it's an expression of power being expressed or used. And it's very much in alignment with this Homeric hero. Whereas the idea or the ideal of Aquarius is mental. It's of the stars. That's what the tarot card is, the star. And the idea of looking at the stars is that you look to the heavens and you find, as above, so below. You God as it is in heaven, as it is on earth, that whole bit. And so that sounds to me like the hero of the mind or the soul. And so our entire era is defined by the struggle between these two forces, or finding balance between these two forces.
Well, first, I want to address something that was asked earlier, that if it's true that cyberpunk metaphysics and some of the foundations of it were literally created by intelligence agencies, does that invalidate it as an art form or as a genre or as a thought process? I would say no.
No.
The same way that Plato was initiated into the Eleusinian mysteries and he was a member of secret societies, that doesn't invalidate anything he's ever said. In fact, that means that I think that we should take it seriously, because like I said, just like how the ancient Greek society was constructed by people that were initiated into the Greek mysteries, you could think of it like the people that are part of the intelligence agencies today are initiated into the Western mysteries, and that they are in charge of sharing the stories that we tell about ourselves today.
I just want to know why the Japanese just casually put very deep cuts of Western mythology and philosophy in their games and anime, and no one bats an eyelash. Meanwhile, us Westerners... But us Westerners are like, what? What's a Sephiroth? What's a Diana? You know what I mean? Like, it's just, I find what's interesting about what you're saying, you have the allegory of the cave. You find this idea reflected there as well. Like, who's the people playing with the weird animal figures? It's those weird dudes in the cloaks. That's what you're talking about. They're the ones that make the movies. And then what do you talk about? Shadow pictures on the wall? That's basically projection, right? You're talking about the movie screen. We're right back to Metropolis again. So you're telling me that even though the people who maybe propagated these ideas into the mainstream with such force may have been initiated into the mysteries, we ought to still find what's valuable and useful in them. I think that's what you're saying. It reminds me of one of my favorite quotes by Robert Anton Wilson. I think he may have borrowed it from someone else, but you always have to be careful because that always happens, right? We live through our fantasies. We merely endure or survive our realities. And so this brings us to the idea of simulation simulacra, where in some sense, the simulated world or the mythological world is in many ways more real to us than our actual world or actual lives, which is why so many people get pissed off about Luke Skywalker and why people treat it with such biblical significance. And it's because it is like our Bible. It addresses what it means to have high technology in a world that's dominated by a power elite, and like why the good guys are always like this bizarre Aquarian collective. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I could kind of elaborate on this because I can kind of see how me making the argument that, well, cyberpunk is controlled by the intelligence agencies, but it's okay because, stories or something. And I can see how that cannot be a complete answer to the question. So I guess the missing component is that Alan Watts and Gregory Bateson, when they were in Asia, they stumbled upon Zen koans. So koans, they're like short stories or poems rather, kind of. They're like poetic stories that they basically tell. It's almost like a Platonic dialogue between a master and a student. It's almost very Jedi-like, right? With the master and the student dialogue. And you can kind of see how Star Wars takes on a very Zen sense, right? When there's always a master and the student, there is. Always two there are. I pulled some koans out because I thought some of them would be pretty interesting to read. So this is an interesting one. It's called The Well. In a well that has not been dug, water from no source is rippling. Someone with no shadow or form is drawing that water. And the more famous ones would be, what is the sound of one hand clapping or something like that. And one of my other favorite ones is a story about a stone bridge. And the people hear about this legendary stone bridge. It's called Josu's Stone Bridge. And they go there and they don't see any bridge there. And they're like, I don't understand, where's the stone bridge? And Josu says only the horses and mules can see it and travel it. And it's because the stones, they're there, but they're just under the water, so you can't see them. But the horses and the mules know that they're there, and they're so small that a human can't see them or step on them. But the horses and the mules know that they're there, so they're able to cross the water. So it's like the path. It's like once you're on the path is illuminated to you. And it kind of reminded me of like in Indiana Jones when he makes the leap of faith, right? And he jumps and he's standing there, but then it's actually, you can see it from another perspective. You can see that the way is open to him, but only when he was on the path could he see the way forward.
This is the way.
Right? This is the way. Yeah, exactly. And then Zen is literally called the way sometimes, right? It's literally called the way.
Christianity was originally called the way as well.
Oh, that makes sense.
So basically Alan Watts gets into this stuff, and so does Gregory Bateson because of their time in Asia. And they realize that these Zen koans have the crazy mystical capacity to break one's mind with like a high level of esoteric cognitive dissonance, meaning that holding two thoughts at your mind at the same time that don't make sense, like the one I just gave you, the really cool one about like, the well that has not been dug, but there's a shadow figure who is, getting the water from it. Like it doesn't make sense, right? It's like contradictory ideas. How does one get water from a well that hasn't been dug? And your mind kind of starts getting weirded out by this experience. And what it turned into is this idea that you could actually go crazy or you could become enlightened,
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I kind of laugh at like the joke is like the Westerners like going to the top of the mountain to try and get the answers from the Zen master, looking for physical gates to a gateless gate. Like they're looking for a portal to a place that the portal is in their mind already. So going to the top of the mountain and asking them, he's going to look at them and be like, you don't understand. The way is shut, And I think that because the way is in their mind, right? It's not actually like a physical gate that they're looking for. And I think that's what Westerners don't understand is that they're missing this component, right? So basically Alan Watts and Gregory Bateson took this concept of the koans and they brought it to the West and they called it the double bind. Are you familiar with the double bind?
I am not. I am familiar with koans. I am not familiar with the double bind.
Double bind is a communication paradox where an individual receives competing contradictory messages similar to the koans that I talked about earlier, leaving them with no correct way to respond. It's almost like a damned if you do and damned if you don't kind of scenario. And while anthropologist Gregory Bateson originally theorized this concept to explain schizophrenia, luminaries like Aldous Huxley and Alduous Watts helped him to adapt it to explore consciousness, Zen Buddhism, and the limitations of human language. So in 1956, Gregory Bateson's double bind defined the double bind trap as a trap where a person is given two conflicting commands, and commenting on the contradiction is forbidden. For example, a parent might give a nonverbal cue of hostility while verbally saying, I love you, and punishing the child for pointing out the mismatch. In therapy, Bateson explored how escaping this paradox requires shifting to a higher meta level of conversation. So it's almost like what the Zen masters were doing was forcing people or students to essentially encounter a scenario where they were forced into a state of metacognition.
What's all that? What?
Right. If the applicant is young, tell him he's too young. Old, too old, fat, too fat.
Applicant?
If the applicant then waits for 3 days without food, shelter, or encouragement, he may then enter and begin his training.
Training for what? Think this is a game? You're too young to train here. End of story. Now quit wasting our time. Get the fuck out of here.
Where they were in light, and that's why you'll see some of these Zen things are kind of like that Archimedes like state of euphoria, like, oh, eureka, I suddenly just got this crazy understanding. I was just peeling potatoes and then carrying water, and then suddenly I became enlightened, kind of thing, right? And makes it clear to me that enlightenment and mental health are very close together, and that obviously we need to take care of both of these at the same time. But it's clear that like basically the koans are like opening a portal, and that portal can be used to open your mind, and then you have to be very careful once your mind is open what you're doing with it, right? So I was thinking a bit from a cyberpunk metaphysics perspective. Koans are like opening disk space in your mind.
Yes.
And when you remember, think about it, all these Zen masters are like, empty your mind, empty your mind. I'm like, oh, so I'm clearing disk space
Yes.
to receive a new download, to receive new operating systems, basically. So it's like I'm receiving the Zen operating system, but I have to empty my mind because it's too cluttered. You know, I have to do a quick defrag of my human hard drive before I can receive a new operating system.
You know, my Wing Chun teacher used to say that you have to forget everything that you think that you know. And this opens you up to learning something totally new and different, and hopefully for the better.
Yep.
It's only after we've lost everything that we're free to do anything.
No, I 100% agree. And look at the similarity with the Cyberpunk Metaphysics download, right? If you want your computer operating system to be upgraded, you have to free up some space to make a new download, right? And if you want to become enlightened, you have to free up a little space in your human hard drive so that your processors can work a little bit faster and so that you're not bogged down. So I think that the Western way of doing things is often, you know, and they think Westerners, including myself, have often thought of enlightenment like, oh, I just need to read one more book. I just need to read one more 500-page book and that's going to fix me. You know what I mean? I just need to gain more knowledge and that's going to fix me. And then the Easterners would say the opposite. Eastern philosophy would say, actually, enlightenment is a process of removing one thing every day rather than adding one thing every day. And I know that's a gross oversimplification, but in terms of the way that I see it, like I can definitely see the overloading of information in the West is kind of like flooding the zone with information, whereas the East is doing its best to like clear the mind and make one like meditate. And I've never been able to meditate, so it's an interesting idea.
You know what this makes me think of is when people complain, they complain about how their life is, but it's almost like they want a different program, but that program doesn't run on their operating system. So you have to forget the operating system, get a new operating system, and then you can have the program that runs on it.
Like scarcity mindset does that.
Yeah.
I know so many people that have that, like a lot of energy vampires have the scarcity mindset because they just don't understand how to get out of that paradigm. But literally, you have to forget about there being limited resources for you to feel abundance. Like, you can't feel abundance. You're like, oh, I'll just wait till I save up some money and buy this thing I want. It's like you said with the books, like reading an extra book and adding to the pile. It's the same thing as materialism, if you think about it, which is why a lot of those paths also teach minimalism, like letting go of material things. It's basically analogous to how your brain should be operating. So having the physical aspect of getting rid of things you don't need helps you clear your mind in that way that they're trying to tell you.
I think a lot of times it boils down to a change of perspective, which is a lot of times that's what philosophy is great for, is learning different perspectives. So if you want to be able to have these so-called downloads, you might not be able to get it from the perspective that you have. Or maybe your life sucks because that's the perspective that you have, is that you're miserable. And if you change your perspective, it changes your life. And if you talk to other people with different perspectives, it can help you look at life a different way.
Like gratitude, for example. If you're destitute and suffering, gratitude is like one of the most magical things you can practice to get out of that mindset. It is really about looking at things with a different perspective. And I think one of the best steps you can take moving forward, if you want to change your paradigm, if you want to basically elevate yourself outside of your, current situation or learn more, like you said, to empty your mind, it's basically admit that you don't know everything and that you can't know everything. And a lot of people can't do that. It's a very big barrier. People are afraid of not knowing. People are afraid of the unknown, but you have to embrace it in order to get to that state of mind of enlightenment.
I think it's kind of scary for people. For probably the vast majority of people, it's scary to think of the idea of emptying your mind or forgetting what you know or letting go of the things and the biases and the perspectives that we have. But it's also, in my opinion, the difference between whether being alone feels like loneliness or if it feels fulfilling. It's kind of the same thing. Like, does emptying your mind scare you, or is it awesome because then you can fill it with new things?
And that's kind of why I got mad when you compared Alan Watts to Neil deGrasse Tyson, because Neil deGrasse Tyson, he's a perfect example of someone who can't admit that he doesn't know anything because he doesn't know any better. He thinks he knows. And the more he adds to his repertoire, he thinks he's more intelligent every day.
He's also a massive douche.
Well, that's a byproduct of him believing this paradigm of thinking I need to hoard knowledge.
He's always so defensive and gets butthurt if he's called out on anything.
Because he thinks he's right. But that's the thing is, like, you have to admit that you may be wrong to even shift your paradigm. So he's not capable of shifting his paradigm because he's stuck in that loop of, oh, I read this book or I saw the published study, so this is true.
I mean, you can kind of summarize it with just once you think you know everything, you close yourself off to learning.
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
They're
That's
basically
exactly
dead already.
That's the beauty of the child's mind, is it's open to learning. So
Yeah.
I think what's important here is that even if the elite are controlling the shadows on the wall, these shadows on the wall are representations of things that we can experience for ourselves. We can slip past those fuckers or join their ranks.
Experiential
and look up
knowledge.
their skirts.
That's like wisdom. That's what I was saying is you can have knowledge and you can hoard it, but it's the experience of the knowledge that gives you the wisdom.
Like, you can't just memorize all the forms they show you on the wall. You have to go seek what
Yes.
they represent in reality.
Or make a shadow puppet bunny with your own hand.
But you can't do
Like-
that unless you become your own hero. Am I getting what you're putting down, sir?
Socrates is like the hero of the mind that we talked about, and it's not the Homeric hero that you need. The Homeric hero can't really escape the cave because they're not rational enough, right? So it's that rationality that allows you to escape the cave and to know what a good life is, to be able to even detect the shadows in the first place, right? So if you're a Homeric hero but you lack that rationality, you lack reason, evidence, and philosophy, you won't be able to recognize that you're looking at shadows, and you'll become, the number one bread and circus cheerer in the stadium watching the shadows on the wall. And I was going to say something that Mari said was really interesting. It said to Socrates earlier about how Socrates actually was the one that said that he only knows that he knows nothing, right?
Yes.
And it's kind of like him letting go as well. He's letting go of his arrogance and letting go of the fact that he thinks that he knows everything. And that's why the Oracle of Delphi said that he was the wisest person, right? And notice that the Oracle of Delphi is in the Apollo's temple, and the Apollonian is the Socratic value, is the Apollo, right? And essentially, it was interesting that you said that because it reminded me that Socrates admitting he knows nothing is just like the Zen master saying, clear your mind, empty your mind. It was like a Greek version of empty your mind. And it also reminded me of something else that Carl Jung said, where he said the first half of life is devoted to forming a healthy ego. The second half is going inward and letting go of it.
Yeah.
You can kind of see this like perennial philosophical golden thread between them that you can almost see it. They're all telling us, they're whispering to us the voices of the past. Just let go. Let what wants to fall. Don't hold on to things, because the more you try and hold on to things, the more they slip through your fingers. The Stoics would say the same, is that the only things you can control are your own reactions to your life. But other than that, you can't control much. So just be a good person and, hold steadfast to your principles and hold fast to the things that are spiritually superior, as Epictetus would say, and distrust all those things which insult your soul.
Yeah, like, it's kind of why I've always been agnostic. I know that there's something more to this reality. I know there's something connecting all of us as living beings. So to let go of that and to think, oh, well, there's no material evidence for that is a fallacy. Because what I've been taught in school is, oh, the rock is hard, therefore it exists and you can hold it. Therefore it's real. But like, there are things that are real that we can't experience unless we're in that higher paradigm.
Or in liminal spaces in our minds.
And like they say, like the realm of forms is more real than reality itself that we're experiencing right now. So,
But if you'd like to feed your soul by hoarding even more knowledge, you can reach deep down inside your wallet and empty it of exactly $5 or more at www.patreon.com/thewholerabbit, where your monthly donation of that $5 or more will grant you instantaneous access to not just the second half of this conversation, which is going to go even further down the rabbit hole, which I don't even know how it's possible, but you'll get the second half of every single one of our episodes, going back over 7 years from the time that I completely lost my mind till now, where I've become a more rational person. You can decide for yourself.
Isn't it?
Which one is better? I miss the old me. I'm sure a lot of people don't. But that being said, Julian, you're going to hang out for another hour with us?
Sure.
All right.
Wow, you sound so excited.
I don't want to be too much because last time I feel like I was over talking too much. So I got to be moderated and I got to be Socratic, Larkonian.
You're our guest.
I can do this all day.
Thank you, everybody. Eat carrots and shoot lasers.
Pew pew pew.
Pew, pew.
Pew.